Sarah, a practical, no-nonsense woman in her late 20s, inherited this place, an old Victorian, sprawling and forgotten, deep in the Willow Creek woods, her great-aunt Mildred's house. Mildred, a woman Sarah barely remembered, who died alone, leaving behind a legacy of dust and shadowed corners, and perhaps something far older and more sinister. Sarah saw potential. Everyone else saw a money pit, a haunted relic. She, however, saw character, charm. So she packed her tools, her paint samples, and her unwavering optimism, and drove out there. The drive itself was a journey into profound isolation. Paved roads gave way to gravel, gravel to dirt, until finally a narrow, overgrown track, barely distinguishable from the surrounding wilderness, led her through a tunnel of ancient, twisted trees, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers reaching for something unseen. And then there it was, Willow Creek Manor, or what was left of its former glory. It stood like a dark sentinel, 3 stories of weathered wood and peeling paint, shrouded by overgrown ivy that seemed to consume its very structure. The windows, dark and empty, stared out like vacant eyes, reflecting only the oppressive gloom of the forest. A chill, sharper than the crisp autumn air, pricked her skin the moment she cut the engine. A feeling, a prickle at the back of her neck, whispered wrong, a deep, unsettling intuition. But Sarah, being Sarah, brushed it off as mere nerves, as the natural creepiness of an old, abandoned house. She was here to fix it, to bring it back to life, to impose her will upon its decaying grandeur. The first few days were exhilarating. She spent hours sweeping away decades of dust, peeling back layers of faded wallpaper that clung to the walls like diseased skin, revealing the faint patterns of generations past. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying the insistent scent of damp wood, mildew, and something else, something metallic, like old blood, subtle but persistent, a tang that hinted at unknown depths beneath the veneer of neglect. She rationalized it away, telling herself that old houses simply have old smells. She aired out the rooms, opened the grimy windows, letting the crisp forest air and a sliver of weak sunlight filter into the oppressive interior. But even with the windows open, the house never truly felt bright. Shadows clung to the corners, deepened by the thick, ancient trees that pressed in on all sides, blocking out most of the sun's warmth. It was always twilight in Willow Creek Manor, even at noon, a perpetual gloom that seemed to sink into the very bones of the building. Then came the sounds. At first, she blamed the house itself, the old bones settling, the wind rattling the loose panes. A floorboard would creak upstairs long after she'd put her tools down for the night, a heavy, deliberate sound, as if someone was walking. She'd freeze, listening intently, her breath held tight in her chest. Silence would follow, profound and consuming. Only her own heart, thrumming a frantic rhythm, filled the void. She'd shrug, tell herself it was just the house, but the creaks became more frequent, more distinct. Not just random groans, but a clear, unsettling pattern. Footsteps, slow, dragging, moving with an unseen purpose. One evening, as dusk bled through the window panes, painting the living room in shades of bruised purple and deepest gray, Sarah was sanding down an old mantelpiece. She hummed to herself, focused on the mundane task. Suddenly, a cold whisper brushed her ear. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, faint, just a murmur, indistinct words, barely caught, but undeniably human, or something mimicking human cadence. She spun around, heart leaping into her throat, a choked cry catching in her windpipe. Nothing. The room was empty. The forest outside was still, silent, save for the rustling of leaves that seemed to carry no sound at all. She told herself it was fatigue, her imagination playing tricks. She just needed a break, a respite from the house's oppressive presence. But the incidents grew, small things at first, almost imperceptible. A wrench she'd left precisely on the kitchen counter would inexplicably be on the floor when she returned. A door she'd sworn she'd closed, even locked, would be found ajar. She started to feel watched, a heavy, constant gaze boring into her back, a prickling sensation that persisted even when she was alone in a room. She'd whirl around abruptly, catching only the faintest ripple in the air, a shadow that wasn't there a moment before, vanishing just as her eyes landed on it, leaving behind only the cold certainty of its former presence. One morning, she woke to the distinct scent of decaying flowers, cloying and sickly sweet, filling her bedroom, so potent it felt like a physical presence. There were no flowers in the house. No flowers close enough outside to explain the overwhelming fragrance. It lingered for hours, making her stomach churn, a taste of rot on her tongue. That day, she started to feel an oppressive weight in the house, a crushing loneliness that wasn't hers, a profound sadness that seemed to seep into the very wood, into her own bones. She found herself whispering, talking to herself more than usual, just to fill the dreadful silence, to push back against the terrifying feeling of being listened to, of every thought being observed. The whispers started getting clearer. Not coherent words, but disturbing fragments. A child's voice, high-pitched and strained, calling out a name she couldn't quite catch. Then, a low guttural murmur, like a growl, that would send shivers down her spine, making her hair stand on end. A sound that spoke of primeval depths. She started sleeping with a heavy flashlight beside her bed, and the lights on in the hallway, clinging to any illusion of safety. One afternoon, while methodically prying away ancient wallpaper in the master bedroom, her crowbar struck something hollow. Behind a loose panel, hidden from view, as if intentionally concealed for decades, was a small cavity. Inside, dusty and brittle with age, was a child's drawing. Crude, vibrant colors, depicting a house unmistakably like this one. But in the window, a dark, spindly figure, all sharp angles and empty eyes, loomed over a small, crying stick figure. The child who drew it had pressed so hard, the crayon had torn through the paper in places, as if desperate to convey an unspeakable terror. Underneath, scrawled in an unsteady, childish hand, was a single, terrifying word. It. That drawing changed everything. It wasn't just old house creaks anymore. Sarah's pragmatism, her unwavering logic, began to crumble into dust. She felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, a fear that was both primal and profoundly spiritual. She knew, with an absolute certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she wasn't alone, and that it, whatever ancient, malevolent entity it was most certainly not friendly. She drove into the nearest town, a tiny cluster of buildings clinging to a forgotten highway, and spent hours in the dusty local library. Old newspapers, town records, anything about Willow Creek Manor. It was painstaking work, a frantic search for answers in a sea of forgotten histories, but eventually she found it. A small, almost forgotten article from 1928, yellowed and brittle. The vanishing of the Blackwood child. A family, the Blackwoods, had lived in the house. A couple and their only daughter, Lily, who was 6 years old. One night, Lily vanished without a trace, no forced entry, no signs of struggle, just gone. The parents searched for weeks, months, their hope slowly eroding, until they themselves, broken by grief and an unspeakable terror, eventually left the house and never returned, moving away and dying years later, still without answers. The local lore whispered of an ancient evil in the surrounding woods, something that stole children, a monstrous child snatcher from forgotten myth. Mildred, Sarah's great-aunt, had bought the house decades later, apparently unaware of its grim history or simply dismissing it as baseless superstition. Sarah drove back to the house that day, the newspaper clipping clutched in her trembling hand, her heart a cold, hard knot of fear. The moment she stepped through the door, the air felt heavier, colder, permeated with a tangible malice. The silence was absolute, but now it felt like a predator holding its breath, a vast, unseen presence observing her every move. She saw the house differently now. The shadows weren't just shadows, they were waiting, shifting, coalescing. The creaks were not just old wood, they were footsteps, the slow, deliberate tread of something ancient. That night, an unyielding terror kept her awake. Every sound was magnified, twisted into something horrific. The wind outside sounded like weeping, like the mournful cries of lost souls. The scratching of branches against the windows was like skeletal claws, scrabbling for purchase, trying to force their way in. She clutched the heavy flashlight, her hands slick with sweat, her knuckles white. Then she heard it, distinct, clear, from the kitchen downstairs, a slow, rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape. Like something heavy, something unnatural, being dragged across the linoleum floor. She held her breath, flashlight beam cutting a desperate, futile circle in the oppressive darkness of her room. The scraping stopped, followed by a wet, guttural sound, like someone clearing their throat, but deeper, more animal, a sound that resonated with unspeakable hunger. Terror seized her, an icy grip on her very soul. She wanted to run, to flee into the night, but her legs were frozen, rooted to the spot by pure, unadulterated fear. She forced herself up, her heart a frantic drum solo against her ribs, and crept to her bedroom door. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, she pushed it open, just a crack. The hallway was black, a void. But from downstairs, a faint, sickly green light pulsed from the kitchen, an unnatural glow that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. Driven by a morbid curiosity, or perhaps just sheer, unadulterated terror, an impulse she couldn't explain, she started to descend the stairs, one agonizing step at a time. Each creak of the old wood felt like a cannon blast in the suffocating quiet, each descent bringing her closer to the unknown. The air grew colder with every step, heavy with that metallic, decaying flower smell, a scent that now seemed to cling to her very being. As she reached the bottom, she saw it. The kitchen was bathed in the faint, nauseating green glow, illuminating the horror within. In the center of the room, something was moving. A low, hunched shape, barely discernible in the strange, distorting light. It was dragging something small, something doll-like, a grotesque parody of innocence. She gasped, a tiny, involuntary sound that ripped through the silence like a gunshot, betraying her presence. The hunched shape froze. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, it turned its head towards her, with a chilling deliberation that spoke of ancient patience. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal. It was a twisted, elongated form, skeletal and gaunt, with limbs that seemed to bend at impossible angles, defying anatomical sense. Its skin, if you could call it that, was like dried, cracked mud, ancient and desiccated. And its eyes, those were the worst. 2 points of burning, malevolent red light, fixed on her with an intelligent, hungry intensity, and a wide, unhinged smile, stretching impossibly far, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, each one a miniature spike of pure terror. It held a small, antique doll in one hand, dragging it by its leg across the floor. The doll, with its button eyes and porcelain face, stared directly at Sarah, its head tilted at an unnatural, disturbing angle. As Sarah stared, utterly horrified, the doll's button eyes seemed to blink. The creature let out a low, sibilant hiss, a sound that felt like ice water in her veins, like venom trickling through her bloodstream. It took a step towards her, that horrifying, unnatural smile widening even further, a silent promise of unimaginable pain. "You found me," it rasped, its voice a gravelly whisper that scraped against her very soul, a sound that felt ancient and wrong. "You came home." Sarah didn't think, she didn't plan. Pure instinctual terror took over, a primal surge that bypassed all logic. She screamed, a raw, guttural sound of utter fear that tore through the silence of the house, shattering the suffocating quiet. She turned and bolted, not for the front door, the obvious escape, but for the back, the nearest exit, through the utility room, towards the desperate hope of the woods. Behind her, she heard it. That scraping sound, faster now, mixed with the sickening thud of its heavy, uneven footsteps. The creature was pursuing her, gaining ground. The sickly sweet smell filled her lungs, making her gag, making her vision swim. She crashed through the utility room, her fingers fumbling frantically with the rusted deadbolt on the back door. It jammed, refusing to yield. She slammed her shoulder into it, once, twice, splinters flying from the decaying wood. The door burst open, revealing the inky blackness of the woods, a terrifying but necessary plunge into the unknown. She didn't look back. She ran blindly, frantically, through the tangled undergrowth, thorns tearing at her clothes and skin, the branches whipping her face. The sounds of the creature, its guttural breathing, its heavy footsteps, echoed behind her, sometimes seeming to be right at her heels, sometimes fading slightly, only to reappear closer, a relentless, inhuman pursuit. She could hear the whispers now, a chilling chorus of tiny, childlike voices, singing an eerie lullaby, mingled with that deep, terrible growl, a symphony of cosmic horror. "Stay with us forever, you belong to it now." She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs felt like lead, until every muscle screamed in protest. She didn't know where she was going, just away. Away from the house, away from the creature, away from that terrifying voice that promised eternal servitude. She finally burst out of the tree line, stumbling onto the gravel road, gasping for air, her body trembling uncontrollably, on the verge of collapse. Far in the distance, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness, she saw the faint glow of headlights, a car. She flagged it down, collapsing onto the road in a sobbing heap, her hands shaking, her mind reeling. The young couple in the car, horrified by her disheveled, bleeding state, helped her with gentle, confused urgency. They took her to the nearest hospital. She was bruised, cut, covered in mud and leaves, but otherwise, miraculously, physically unharmed. Mentally, it was a different story. The horrors she had witnessed had fractured something deep within her. She tried to tell them, the creature, the whispers, the house itself, but it sounded insane, a madwoman's ravings. The police went to Willow Creek Manor, but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no creature, no doll. Just an old, empty house, silent and seemingly innocuous. Sarah knew better. The house wasn't empty, it was waiting. And it had merely retreated, a predator observing its prey. She never went back. The house sits there still, deep in the Willow Creek woods, abandoned once more, a dark secret buried within its ancient timbers. Some locals say you can still see it from the old dirt track, a dark shadow among the trees, its windows like empty eyes, always watching. And some say, on the quietest nights, if you listen very closely, you can hear it. The faint childlike whispers carried on the wind, an insidious invitation to come inside, to stay, forever. And sometimes, late at night, in the deepest quiet of her new safe apartment, Sarah can still hear it. That raspy ancient voice whispering her name, echoing in the darkest corners of her mind. And she knows it's waiting, and it remembers her. It will always remember her, a tiny spark of awareness in its vast, alien consciousness, forever bound to the horrors of Willow Creek Manor.